Okay, I think we should be good to go. So, welcome everybody to ONOS Technical Steering meeting. We've had a couple of weeks of absence due to travel and due to the GoldenEye release activities, but we're back. And today we're going to talk about two things. First of all, we're going to talk about ONOS projects and their life cycle. It's a proposal for tracking, basically for new way of tracking work, and Bill is going to walk us through that. And then also there's an additional item on the list, which is a proposal for access control based on DHCP, and Alexis will talk about that. First of all, though, let's switch to a community acknowledgement here. David had asked me to give a shout out to Kisti and Crionet for really quickly installing a GoldenEye release and getting it running on their network of about 25 devices and 90 or so links. And so there's a blog post written about that, and so this is really great. This is we like to see these things because it sort of confirms that ease of install and utility of ONOS is where we want it to be. So this is great. Thanks, guys, and we welcome more people to try to do this. All right, and so I think we can move on to the ONOS project lifecycle. Bill, is there? Do you want me to pass you the presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay, I gave you the presentation rights.
Okay, can you see that?
Not yet. Not yet. There we go. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Apologies ahead of time. I'm having real bandwidth problems today. Okay, so this is on the wiki in the steering space under governance, and it is a new process that we're going to use to help us scale projects on ONOS. It was approved in the board meeting as a kind of concept and an add-on to the governance. Now it's up to the steering team and the rest of us to make it work out. And what I want to do is just walk through some of the high points of it. I'll read it on the wiki. And I think what we want to do after this is one is get any people think we need to make, but two is more importantly is pick a project and run it through the process and just see how that works and then iterate from there. Okay, so the way that projects come into being today is that I think kind of everything is assumed that it's going to be heading into core, or that distinction isn't even made. And so proposals are brought to the TST, and they're approved at the TST, and then they kind of move from there without any kind of life cycle attached to them. And so this tries to fix that and to make it a little bit more clear for each project what stage of the life cycle they're at, and also make it clear on whether or not they're trying to become a part of the core ONOS distribution. Okay, so in just going down through some of the governance type statements here at the top, a project is one or more modules, and the creation, maintenance, and promotion of that follows this life cycle. The TST is responsible for creating, aligning, and coordinating the projects and the modules. The TST has the power to reorganize projects and modules, again, after sufficient interaction with the community. And within a project, individual projects can go ahead and organize their own modules. So the TST doesn't have to reach into projects and do that level of organization.
Hey Bill.
Yes.
Quick question. Sorry, we're getting some wicked feedback here.
Yep.
Anyway, I guess the question is, do you have sort of an example of what a project would be?
Probably a good one would be ACTH.
Could you repeat that?
Is that the right acronym? The one that we had reviewed just a couple of weeks back was it ACTH?
Like boy, it's really difficult to talk with
iOS project.
ACTN.
ACT. Okay, sorry, ACTN. So that would be a good example of one, I think.
Okay, so these are typically like applications or services that someone may want to include under the ONOS umbrella, but aren't part of the core platform.
Or they aren't required to start out as part of the core platform, right?
Okay. Yeah, I guess my where I'm struggling a little bit here is in sort of how this kind of fits into what we have in existence today, and kind of like how we'd start to separate out some of the stuff as part of the core. And yeah, I don't know, I guess this is all a bit abstract to me still. I don't have a clear mapping, but maybe that's something that I could work with someone to improve my understanding of.
So also let me say, when I use the term core, I refer to that as the kind of trademarked distribution of ONOS, right? And so you can envision that there's a core of ONOS which is much more tightly maintained with more stringent requirements for quality and maintenance and activity. But there may be also a set of useful, whether they're applications or add-ons or plugins, which can be added to that core. And maybe they start without that high bar of quality, right? Because they just haven't reached that level of maturity yet. And this kind of gives them a pathway to move towards that level of maturity. And maybe they just get to a state called mature, or maybe they transition into the core distribution and then have all of those requirements for the quality and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, might the P4 stuff that Carmelo's working on be considered a project, or any of the southbound we add additionally?
That'd be a good example.
And
yes.
And then potentially some of the applications that we currently have, like the reactive forwarding application, might be a project. Or maybe the MCAS forwarding or the segment routing application we want to potentially ship with ONOS, but isn't necessarily required for its functionality in all deployments.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That helps.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, ONOS project here is something you want to put in the Git repository. Is pretty much what this project is. So you want to have something into the master branch. Meaning, anyone can build an ONOS app outside the repo, but if they want to put something in the master repo, they must go through this process. Is that what
that was not how I understood it. So Bill, what constraints does this place on the distribution of these projects? So someone creates a new project on top of ONOS. This could be an application, but they could maintain it in a separate repository. Would that still be under this lifecycle?
So it could be if their intention is to end up in core, right? So it's a way of tracking that project through it being in what's called incubation, and then it can, maybe it becomes mature for a while before going into core, or maybe it goes directly from incubation into core. If they have no intention of ever being a part of the core distribution, they can just be something that's outside of ONOS, and it doesn't have to be really tracked at all by the TST.
Okay. To Yuto's question, is there sort of an implication here that, well, in order to be included in the ONOS main repository, presumably you'd have to go through either core feature development or the project lifecycle. But is there a requirement that projects that are going through the project lifecycle are hosted in the main repo, or is it possible for them to have additional side repos? Is that sort of covered under the scope of this?
That has not been a part of the scope of this document. That's totally up to the TST. I think how you want to, where you want to put things.
But presumably that anything going through this project lifecycle will have some ability to host code either within the main ONOS repo or a project repo that is hosted next to it in Garrett or something.
Right.
Right. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail us there. I don't know if you want to continue. I think we're good here on questions.
Okay, no, those are all excellent questions, and I think brings a lot more clarity to the following, to the rest of the discussion. Okay, so TST, of course, encourages new projects, and new projects come in through a proposal to the TST, and if they're approved, then they become incubation state. Okay, and anybody in the ONOS technical community can submit a proposal to the TST. Okay, and then any TST member can request promotion of that project. And with respect to one that's in incubation stage, then also the project lead can request that it be promoted. Okay. And then any TST member can request that it be considered for promotion into core or transitioned into archive state. Okay. Sorry, Lucas trying to interact with me here. Okay, so this is a table of the different states. So something starts as a proposal, which means the project doesn't formally exist yet. It may not really have resources yet, but somebody is starting to work on it and has thought about it enough to bring a proposal to the TST. Then there's a state called incubation, and that's for a project that has been approved by the TST and it has resources working on it, but it's just recognized to be nascent or immature project. It's a state called mature, where the project is functioning, stable, has achieved releases, but is not a required component of the ONOS core distribution. And then there's core, where the project is a required component of the core distribution. And then there's archived, where a project is no longer useful or being actively worked on. Okay, and this gives you an idea of what the state transitions are. So you start with a proposal, the proposal moves into incubation, and it does that through a creation review. And I'll talk a little bit more about the steps in these different reviews, but the TST will go through a creation review on that proposal, and if it passes, then it moves into incubation. From incubation, it can move into mature, or it could go directly to core. And is in a mature, then all it has to do is pass a graduation review. If it's going to go into core, then it will have to pass both the graduation and a core review, and those can be done at the same time. A project that is mature can then also move into core, the core review. And then a project in any state can move into archive through an archive review.
Can I ask a question, or should I wait? Hold on.
Right?
So I kind of don't understand what.
No, please go ahead. Ask a question.
This required component of the ONOS core or something is say, for example, assuming the segment routing code became solid enough, but I think it will never be required by the core. So what do you mean by required? I think this mature and core seems to be two different things. I mean, core is
so being distributed, right? Being distributed with, as part of what we call the core ONOS distribution, right? It doesn't mean that you have to use it or run it, right? It just means that it is a formal part of what we call ONOS.
Yes,
and it's at the level, right? So an ONOS distribution, we stand behind at a certain level of quality and being integrated and having the documentation and having the tests, and there's a lot of requirements for that, right? And a new project won't start with all of that, so it'll take time for a project to kind of build to that level of maturity.
I want to sort of follow up on what,
so does that answer the question?
What you just said. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Bob.
Yeah, so I hear sort of two definitions of core, and I think that may be where Yuta is coming from, which is that in the TST meetings and sort of project organization and discussion, there has been this idea of the ONOS core as being basically the ONOS kernel, these sort of core subsystems and APIs that are sort of part of the ONOS kernel from kind of a technical perspective. And I think it's very much like, kernel subsystems in a server operating system. But a kernel is not an operating system. An operating system includes other things that are not part of the kernel, but are things like system applications or utilities or documentation, all these other sorts of things that aren't necessarily parts of the operating system kernel. And in the case of ONOS, they're not parts of the core components of the system or the core APIs or classes or methods. And so segment routing is sort of an interesting thing. Like, well, okay, is it part of the kernel? Is it an application? I'm not sure, but I think there is an important distinction to be made between sort of what is part of the ONOS kernel core from a technical perspective versus what is part of the ONOS operating system distribution. And I think sort of Bill's use of core means it's sort of part of the official supported distribution. And my perspective, the ONOS core is actually this core set of APIs that is sort of central to the ONOS kernel. And so I think we should perhaps try to tease those things apart and sort of make clear what's what and what we mean when we say ONOS core in which context.
Correct. Yeah. So thank you, Bob. Yeah, that's good clarification, and that is exactly how I'm using the term. So when I say core, it's about core distribution, because this is part of the governance document, and so the governance document talks about kind of the behavior and rights and so forth around what this official distribution is, right? And there's a core part of that distribution, and then there's other useful projects that are part of the ONOS community. So maybe we should call this something different. I mean, we could do that and avoid this, the confusion.
It's worth thinking about because the terms are a little bit a little bit overloaded and definitely have been, I mean, in the TST meetings previously, the core sort of meant the core classes and modules of the ONOS kernel, not necessarily the components of the supported components of the distribution, including things like documentation and system applications and utilities and other things that aren't part of the sort of kernel, that are sort of more application type things. But still maybe in the repository, sample applications, helper code, all sorts of things.
Yep. Okay, good. So does Utah still have a question, or did all of that answer it?
Yeah, I think that clarifies the point. I guess the core means something like ONOS as a Ubuntu-ish term.
The problem exists in Linux too, where Linux applies to the kernel, but is also used as shorthand, like, well, also is like Unix. It describes the whole operating system.
Yeah.
Okay. So what comes next is a list of the things that could be checked at the different types of reviews. And this is just a set that was put together by me and Scott, and really primarily by Scott from his experience with other projects in the Linux Foundation. And I think this is a place where we'll have to iterate as we go through and decide which of these things is useful and what is missing. But for just creating the project, it's some pretty basic things of checking trademark, and it's got a name. It's, everyone knows what it is. Its scope is well defined. There's some resources that are committed. There's some initial committers, and some contributors, meeting projects policies. It's been socialized. So forth. You can read through these, right? But so that'd be the first thing. So if we take this first project, say ACTM through this, right, then we'll do a creation review, and then just document that all of these things have been met, right? Which I think also begs another thing that needs to be created, and that is a place somewhere on the wiki so that we can have a kind of a formal place where it documents that the review has happened and what the outcome of that review is, and a place where anybody can go and see all of the projects and where they're at in the life cycle. Okay, any questions on that? Oh, no.
Looks
Am I still here?
Yes, you're
one question
there.
for
Sorry.
you about the archive, Phil.
Okay, good. I dropped off again.
Regarding the archive state.
Okay, so graduation.
Wow, he's lagging. Bill, can you hear us?
Yes, go ahead, Brian.
Yes.
So you can go ahead with the graduation review if you want. I'll hold the question.
Okay. Okay, so graduation brings you to mature state, so it has a more stringent set of requirements. So you've got your module owners named. You've been able to demonstrate that the code base is stable. It has documentation. It has tests. You can demonstrate an active community working on it. There's been a history of releases. And so the TST reviews all of that and just make sure that that level of quality exists for it to be called a mature project. Okay. Did you want to ask your question?
Well, I can ask the question about the archive state, actually.
Okay.
So the question is, when a project transitions to archive state, is there a mechanism by which the code is going to be archived, or are we just going to rely on version control for that and maybe mark the documentation as archived?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it. It's a good question.
So, Bill, by documents, do you mean documentation?
Yes.
If you don't mind, I
guess more specifically,
or actually, maybe you can clarify it.
Right. So documentation, for the way that we define documentation in ONOS, right? And that's been under some discussion lately, is how do we automatically generate some of that documentation, and what is the right level, and we've gotten the feedback that we don't have sufficient documentation on some of these things, right? So some of that's in flux, and it's going to need some work to define what that really means. Any comments, Bob?
Hi, this is Dave Lenro. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. I was going to answer, but yes, I can hear you.
So I guess the comment I would make is that it seems like one of the things that should be happening as you go through the maturity cycle is you should be getting to a place where the core of the platform doesn't change dramatically or unexpectedly, right? And so the things that are layered on top of the platform continue to be sort of lightweight and things that you can try and roll back easily and that sort of thing. But the operators have talked a lot about wanting to have sort of a core that is mostly distinguished by the fact that the code changes infrequently and only when absolutely necessary. And so I think that may be a clear distinction between something that's very mature but isn't part of core for whatever reason, as opposed to something that is. I don't see that reflected here. That really, at the incubation end of it should be the wide open funnel and a great place to experiment and innovate and try things with no real kind of heavy burdens or responsibilities. And then by the time you get up to core, there should be big benefits for the project team so that there's some incentive to do all the hard work to move up the maturity stack, but also some sort of pushback to ask the question of, is this project so fundamental to the platform that we want to make changes to this project, things that change sort of the kernel, as you described in sort of the Linux analogy.
Yeah, I concur with that. That I think the path isn't necessarily linear from incubation to mature to core. I actually expect it to go incubation to core and then mature. Like you say that, when I think something is mature, well, maybe mature, maybe to core. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to progress that way. It could just be mature and then archived. It could be core and then mature. But I concur that I think something is mature in sort of two ways. One is if its API is stable, right? That's one thing you mentioned, that you want to have a stable platform to build on, and the API hasn't changed it. But usually code maturity, as you described, is something where it's basically feature complete. The API is stabilized, and really there isn't a lot of development or change to the code as well. So those are sort of kind of different things. And the interesting thing with kind of operating systems and software systems in general is that in many cases you'll have something that is of high quality and is central to the project and is in the core, yet it's very clear that it's on an evolving path, and over a course of many years, it will be undergoing continuous change. And so that's an example of something that's not mature. It's under active development still, but it's still considered core. It's essential to the system. It has reasonably stable APIs, but the APIs are probably going to change. They'll have like our typical stability where we have they'll have some API stability lifecycle where the old APIs will get deprecated and new ones will phase in. So that's really something I think it's valuable to consider. So I would echo what he just said.
And I think some of the thinking here came out of the simultaneous release mentality that came out of the Eclipse community, and the idea that sort of everything that could ever be possibly integrated into the platform should become part of one giant monolithic release where you can guarantee that everything interoperates with everything. And I'm not sure we ever want to go there with SDN controllers. I think the problem there is you create the sense that if you're not part of the core release, you're not important or you're not valuable. I think we need to really establish that core is core for a bunch of reasons that don't have anything to do with how useful or valuable it is. It really has to do with trying to engineer this low rate of change kernel thing that all the operators are going to require. If they, and I guess in the Linux analogy, I can get userland cleverness of all sorts that runs across many, many different versions of the kernel, and it allows the operator to really choose when they upgrade their kernel, because that's so fundamental. Everything in the platform is at risk anytime you change a line of code in the kernel, sort of a thing. And I think Open Daylight doesn't have any such concept and has steered towards this. Everything's part of the simultaneous release. We might want to engineer an approach where we say there are these two or more distinct classes of code, and the goal is not to have them all sort of treated equally and go through equally rigorous stuff and then all release together, but to say this really is the kernel of ONOS, and you should be able to swap out all the things that are layered on top of it without having to change kernels, or you should be able to change kernels, the other way.
Absolutely. The power of platforms is that the applications are, sort of decoupled from the core platform and can build on a stable API, and can evolve independently and separately.
Right. So the simultaneous release model says, if we want to release Microsoft Office, it has to be part of the Windows release or upgrade or something, which clearly wouldn't work at all. And I think is sort of where the Open Daylight model is headed, and I don't think that's a good direction in the long term.
That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, good comments.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with them in terms of changes to a document like this, but I wanted to kind of get the ideas on the table.
Well, I think this is slightly orthogonal, but there is definitely a degree of correlation, and so the idea, I guess, will be how we apply this process will be towards getting to the point where the API stabilize. I mean, they can clearly evolve, but they should stabilize so that applications written for previous versions will continue to work, and all of the points that you made, Dave and Bob made about the stability of the platform have certainly a lot of benefits that that would be long list of benefits that would be too long to enumerate here.
And I took some notes, Dave. I think that there are some things like around stability and some more comments that made me think that, again, the use of the term core is going to continue to cause more confusion, right? So I think as we kind of apply this in our first set of reviews, and as we update the wiki, I think we can fix some of those things and make it better. That's good.
Yeah. Maybe.
Okay, the last one is for the termination review to move something into our archive state. So you can look at this one's kind of an easy one. You post it and you state why it's being terminated, and I think the important part is making sure you go through the process of understanding the impact on other projects and how to mitigate those, and making sure there's adequate community conversation about that, so that nobody's kind of left high and dry, or they are left in a state which is less than ideal. Then what are the steps that you take to move them forward out of that?
Yeah. We don't have an incident like left pad, right?
Yep. Okay, so So I think the other thing I'd say is this has been intentionally left maybe a little bit simple and vague because I want to leave it open. I don't want to try to specify too much too soon. So I think after we go through a few examples, it'll start to gain some meat and be clearer.
Okay. So
okay, so that's all I have for right now.
All right. So if there is if there isn't any other comments or questions or suggestions, I guess what we could do is we can move on to the next next item on the list, which was the proposal for access control based on DHCP. And Alexis,
so maybe there's one thing, Thomas.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe there's one thing in the what's different tomorrow is now as proposals come into the TST that we start actually running them through this process and see how it works and adapt it. So whatever, and maybe we pick a couple that have been recent. Again, like the ACTM, I think would have been a good one to do. Maybe the P4 is a good one, but we should pick a couple to start working through this process. So maybe we can find some volunteers.
Okay. So you don't envision all of them necessarily to begin with? Work.
Well, I don't want to overwhelm things, but I want to get started with one or two and see how it works.
Sounds good. Okay. So I think we've already discussed with Iowa taking the ACTN project through this. And nothing, maybe like you said, P4, we can do the P4 one. Even though that one, I'm not sure probably where in the life cycle we will pick up on that, but we can certainly discuss it because a lot of work has already been done there. So we would need to figure out where to sort of start it in its life cycle.
Okay, so let's start with iOS, and I think he's on the call, so maybe you could even agree to that, right? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I just got some intermittent signal, so I couldn't hear a lot of the conversation clearly. But yeah, I kind of agree with what Thomas is saying. We should go through this life cycle with ACTN as a starting point.
Great. Perfect. Okay. So thanks, Bill. Thanks for going through this. So I think we can pass the control over to Alexis.
Thank you, Thomas.
I'm gonna make you a presenter.
Okay.
So I think when you're ready, you can share your screen.
Okay, do you see anything?
Not yet. There's usually a little bit of a delay. There we go. Yes, we can now.
Okay, great. Well, I had previously, I guess 2 weeks ago, tried to advertise this proposal on the forum. Actually, the application we are trying to contribute is we have an OpenFlow switch, and we have a client machine which want to access the service. So to access that service, they have first to identify themselves, and the DHCP server has to give them the IP addresses. And but the conversation between clients and DHCP servers, the packets which are being sent during the conversation can be captured by the ONOS controller as well. And the ONOS controller can push some rules according to the DHCP, the packets that it is receiving. It's actually this. ONOS will be pushing rules according to the packets that it is receiving, and then customers, when they are allowed, they can access the service. If they are not allowed, they will be refused. For the moment, we are a team of 3 people working on this. And I had previously written an email asking about the procedures of contributing and whether it is the steering committee which has to approve this. So I came today actually to have the answers. Are we going to follow just the procedures of which has been talked in the first point here? I mean, this one of that has been presented before.
Well, that's which is one of the reasons I asked Bill the question originally on this. It seems like given that there are benefits of the new process to both both TST as well as to the participants, or basically the drivers of the project, and in following that new process, I'm thinking that we should probably run it through that process as well. I mean, that's my, at least that's my take on it. If there is, Bill or Madan or Brian, if you guys have any other suggestions.
So I would agree. And if we're doing it well, then it shouldn't cause them a lot of pain, and it shouldn't slow them down.
Right, exactly.
So,
yep.
It's sort of a test case for the process. You can see how it goes.
Yep.
And then, see if it needs to be changed.
Yep. So I would go through that process.
Okay, that is fine. For other updates that I can share is that we've already started to do this application, the coding, but we are actually running it on ONOS 1.5. So we haven't actually started to try it on 1.6 or 1.7. Well, when it works on 1.5, within 3 or 4 weeks, we'll start to put it on another version to see whether it works, so that it can be released in the next series, I would say.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right. So I have also noticed that there are some proposals which have been they have been shared on the link, if I remember very well. They are here. Well, yeah, here. So should we actually include this proposal among the proposals which are on this page here?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because the feature proposals were this is the old process, which was a little bit more, I guess, ad hoc, and I think it just pretty much consisted of tracking the work on a wiki and priming the work with initial discussion in TST, which is sort of the issue with it is that even though the discussion was had on TST, beyond that point, the work was really not tracked in any formal manner, and there was no way sort of to figure out at which point in time or which point of readiness the project should move forward. And so I'm not sure how we want to reconcile the existing features with the new feature proposals with the new lifecycle. It seems like we could probably just rework this page to sort of adhere with a new process, and maybe indicate where the individual pieces of sort of the legacy features or legacy projects would be considered in terms of if they were tracked through the new process. Did you have?
I think you probably want to at least declare all of the incubation by default. They got grandfathered in as incubation or something because there was no formal process.
Yeah. Yeah, there should definitely.
I would agree, Thomas. Let's put it on this page, and then we can get this page edited to. I mean, we can always move things around, but at least they can get it put up there now.
Yeah, at least it doesn't get fragmented, right? And then we can move this content forward.
And this looks like the place where the project team would want to post their plan in order to start the 2-week, Q&A period. You sort of post something on this page and then send email to the various mail links saying there's a new proposal available for public review or something.
Sure, good idea.
Well, so if I have heard you very well, there is no need to put my proposal on this page here, right?
No, I would put it on this page.
Okay,
Put it on this page, but we'll run it through the formal process, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go sweep through this area of wiki and make sure that we update it so that it's compliant with the new process, new project. Basically.
Okay.
Okay.
That is fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the process says there's a sort of a 2-week between publishing and when the TST would approve it, I guess, and so you probably want to do that sooner than later just to start your 2-week timer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. So
coming back to the first point, it means that we've already proposed this one. So officially, you are going to publish it on some page, and so it means that our application is going to enter the incubation phase, right? Well, I'm just referring to the first point where you've been presenting about the publishing the proposal, having the incubation, the mature phase, the core phase, the archive phase. Will our application have to run into these phases as well? Yeah. So if you want to consider this meeting as the formal proposal, then I guess yes. But I guess. Yeah, I guess if you...
Yes, so it's being proposed here. It'll be in proposals for 2 weeks, right? And then in 2 weeks, it can have its official review to become incubation.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, so...
Yeah.
Does that 2 weeks create hardship for the project? Is there anything you're not going to be able to do in terms of coding and development for the next 2 weeks if you have to wait?
For the next 2 weeks, I think it will be possible. If I meet a challenge, I will let you know so that we can postpone for the other 2 weeks. But for the next 2 weeks, I think it will be okay.
I think a project team could claim hardship and that we didn't know about this process until now and it's not fair and all that kind of thing. But if it's not a hardship for you, you guys could be the first project to go through the official process and kind of kick it off.
Okay. So can I have some clarification from the incubation process to mature phase? I mean, what are the requirements for a project to move from the incubation to mature? Do you guys have some testing tools that you use to do that, or it's just well, I want some clarification on that from the incubation to mature phase.
That's a good question. I don't think we have it formalized that yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, so we will try our best.
Let's first worry about going through the first transition, and then we'll work out things as time goes on. Because remember, this is a brand new process. So.
All right, that sounds great. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you just edit this page then and basically provide the details of the proposal here, that'll kick off the process. Okay.
The details actually, what I had planned were actually giving the contact team, the overview, and just this summary of the framework.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, this is actually what I'm planning to put on the future proposals page, and that will be okay.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So does anybody have anything else to discuss at this point in time?
I just have one more sort of thought, and that is that it seems that a missing piece, this is not necessarily technical steering team, but it's sort of related to the ONOS platform, and that is that I foresee a need for a, not necessarily ONOS App Store, but certainly a way of cataloging, identifying, and providing ways of people obtaining applications that run on the ONOS platform, but aren't necessarily part of the ONOS distribution. So it's something to think about, and it seems like it's currently kind of a missing piece, but will become more important in the future when there are more applications and software components that aren't necessarily part of the ONOS distribution, yet are still useful and valuable, and people want to be able to find them and install them and run them.
Right. Makes sense. Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Because if not, we're a little bit past the. We're closing to the end of the hour here. So if nobody has anything else, we can probably conclude the meeting. And next week we're gonna hold it at 9:30 to 10:30 in the morning, and it will be the primary point of discussion will be proposal for vector-based link weights for path computation using rather than using just scalar weights, using basically a vector of various metrics. Okay. So we'll.
Is that going to be a creation review, or is that just a sort of informational session?
That's gonna be more of a. It's actually this one pertains more towards addressing functionality at the sort of at the generic level at the core and API. Figure out how to adjust the API to allow supplying vector. So it's not really gonna be treated as a separate project per se. It's gonna be more of a
internal
API
enhancement or something. Yeah.
Yep.
I guess that's sort of a question. I mean, is there a formal process for, sort of major API changes or not?
Well, right now we really don't have one. Right now it's been basically just. I mean, I guess winging it would be the way to say it. Having discussion, making sure, assess the implication of the API changes, how to best go about it to make it elegant and at the same time without breaking backwards compatibility. And I think that will be the case in this particular discussion, because the current API calls for scalar weight link function, and which we're clearly going to have to continue to maintain, but then how to best introduce the support for allowing link weights to be presented with scalars, with vectors. So to answer your question, Bob, no, we don't really have a process for that. I guess suggestions for improvements would be welcome here.
Yeah, and similarly, the requirements to change your APIs if your core should be a lot, stricter than if you're incubation. again, the number of things that depend on an incubation project should be pretty near zero most of the time.
Yeah, and we do have a deprecation. We do have a deprecation policy. We've been trying to stick with it. There were a few exceptions where we basically broke adherence to the policy, but it was on sort of a after some heavy discussion and code reviews. But for the most part, we've been sticking with it in the sense that APIs at the core are subject to being deprecated for at least one release. And after that release, we're free to delete those deprecated APIs. And this is to give applications the window of opportunity to be able to react to those changes. And I expect that the window will get progressively longer as ONOS itself matures, and eventually, as you alluded to, David, eventually they would actually remain. The APIs would just remain. But for
I think the case where the TSC might get involved in APIs is, would be if one project changes an API in the way that breaks everyone else and disrupts a release. But otherwise, probably want to leave a fair amount of autonomy with the projects for that.
Oh, for sure, yes. I was talking about here the core network model, and here we're using the overloaded term core, so I guess core as in kernel versus core as in standard distribution, two different things, right? So I was talking about here more in the context of core as the kernel.
Got it.
All right. So I think if nobody has anything else, it's the top of the hour here, so we can call it done, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.